The phenomenon of climate change represents one of the most pressing and complex challenges facing humanity in the 21st century, encompassing a vast array of interconnected environmental, social, economic, and political dimensions that require urgent and coordinated global action. Climate change refers to long-term shifts in global temperatures and weather patterns, primarily driven by human activities that release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, fundamentally altering the delicate balance of Earth's climate system that has remained relatively stable for thousands of years. The scientific evidence for climate change is overwhelming and continues to mount with each passing year, as researchers around the world document rising global temperatures, melting ice sheets, rising sea levels, changing precipitation patterns, and increasingly frequent extreme weather events that collectively paint a picture of a planet undergoing rapid and potentially irreversible transformation. The primary driver of contemporary climate change is the emission of greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, which trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere through what is known as the greenhouse effect. While the greenhouse effect itself is a natural phenomenon essential for maintaining Earth's temperature at levels suitable for life, human activities have dramatically increased the concentration of these gases in the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century. The burning of fossil fuels for energy production, transportation, and industrial processes accounts for the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions, releasing billions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere annually. Deforestation and land use changes further contribute to climate change by reducing the Earth's capacity to absorb carbon dioxide through photosynthesis while simultaneously releasing stored carbon from vegetation and soils. The consequences of climate change are already manifesting across the globe in ways that affect every aspect of human society and natural ecosystems. Rising global temperatures have led to the melting of polar ice caps and glaciers, contributing to sea level rise that threatens coastal communities and low-lying island nations with flooding and eventual submersion. The Arctic region has experienced particularly dramatic changes, with sea ice extent declining rapidly and permafrost thawing, releasing additional greenhouse gases that accelerate the warming process through positive feedback loops. Changes in precipitation patterns have resulted in more frequent and severe droughts in some regions while causing increased flooding and extreme weather events in others, disrupting agricultural systems, water supplies, and human settlements. Agriculture, which forms the foundation of human civilization and food security, faces unprecedented challenges from climate change, as shifting temperature and precipitation patterns alter growing conditions for crops around the world. Many staple food crops, including wheat, rice, and corn, are sensitive to temperature changes and water availability, with yields declining in regions experiencing higher temperatures and altered rainfall patterns. Heat stress, drought, and extreme weather events can devastate entire harvests, leading to food shortages and price volatility that disproportionately affect vulnerable populations in developing countries. Changing climate conditions also favor the spread of agricultural pests and diseases, requiring farmers to adapt their practices and potentially increasing their reliance on pesticides and other chemical inputs. Ocean ecosystems are experiencing profound changes as a result of climate change, with rising sea temperatures, ocean acidification, and changing current patterns affecting marine life from microscopic plankton to large marine mammals. Coral reefs, often called the rainforests of the sea due to their incredible biodiversity, are particularly vulnerable to rising ocean temperatures and acidification, with widespread bleaching events destroying these vital ecosystems that support countless species and provide livelihoods for millions of people. Fish populations are shifting their ranges in response to changing ocean conditions, affecting fishing communities and food security in coastal regions around the world. The economic implications of climate change are staggering, with estimates suggesting that unmitigated climate change could reduce global economic output by significant percentages by the end of the century. The costs of climate change manifest in various forms, including damage to infrastructure from extreme weather events, reduced agricultural productivity, increased healthcare costs related to heat-related illnesses and vector-borne diseases, and the need for massive investments in adaptation and mitigation measures. Insurance companies and financial institutions are beginning to recognize climate change as a significant risk factor that affects the stability of entire economic systems, leading to calls for better climate risk assessment and disclosure. Human health is increasingly threatened by climate change through multiple pathways, including heat-related illness, air pollution, vector-borne diseases, food and water insecurity, and mental health impacts from climate-related disasters and displacement. Rising temperatures increase the risk of heat exhaustion and heat stroke, particularly among vulnerable populations such as the elderly, children, and people with chronic health conditions. Changes in precipitation patterns and temperature affect the geographic range and seasonal patterns of disease vectors such as mosquitoes and ticks, potentially exposing new populations to diseases like malaria, dengue fever, and Lyme disease. Social justice and equity considerations are central to understanding the impacts of climate change, as the effects are not distributed equally across populations or geographic regions. Developing countries, which have contributed least to historical greenhouse gas emissions, often face the greatest risks from climate change impacts due to their geographic location, limited adaptive capacity, and dependence on climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture. Within countries, marginalized communities, including indigenous peoples, racial minorities, and low-income populations, frequently bear disproportionate burdens from climate change impacts while having fewer resources to adapt and recover from climate-related disasters. The international community has recognized the need for coordinated action on climate change through various agreements and frameworks, most notably the Paris Agreement adopted in 2015, which commits countries to limiting global temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, while pursuing efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Achieving these goals requires rapid and far-reaching transitions in energy, land, urban infrastructure, and industrial systems, with global emissions needing to decline by approximately 45% from 2010 levels by 2030 and reach net zero emissions by around 2050. Mitigation efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions involve transitioning away from fossil fuels toward renewable energy sources, such as solar, wind, and hydroelectric power, improving energy efficiency in buildings and transportation systems, and developing carbon capture and storage technologies that can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or prevent its release from industrial processes. The renewable energy sector has experienced remarkable growth and cost reductions in recent years, making clean energy increasingly competitive with fossil fuels in many markets and creating new economic opportunities in manufacturing, installation, and maintenance of renewable energy systems. Adaptation strategies focus on building resilience to climate change impacts that cannot be avoided, including developing drought-resistant crop varieties, improving water management systems, strengthening coastal defenses against sea level rise, and creating early warning systems for extreme weather events. Nature-based solutions that work with natural ecosystems to provide climate benefits have gained increasing attention, including forest restoration projects that sequester carbon while providing habitat for wildlife, wetland restoration that provides flood protection while supporting biodiversity, and urban green infrastructure that reduces heat island effects while improving air quality. The role of technology in addressing climate change extends beyond renewable energy to include innovations in transportation, such as electric vehicles and sustainable aviation fuels, advances in industrial processes that reduce emissions, and digital technologies that improve energy efficiency and enable better monitoring and management of environmental resources. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are being applied to optimize energy systems, predict climate impacts, and develop new materials and processes that can contribute to climate solutions. Individual actions and lifestyle changes also play important roles in addressing climate change, though they must be supported by systemic changes in policies, infrastructure, and economic incentives. Personal choices regarding energy consumption, transportation, diet, and consumption patterns can contribute to emission reductions while demonstrating public support for climate action and creating demand for sustainable products and services. Education and awareness-raising efforts help build understanding of climate science and solutions while empowering individuals and communities to take meaningful action. The transition to a low-carbon economy presents both challenges and opportunities for different sectors and regions, requiring careful management to ensure that the benefits and costs are fairly distributed and that workers and communities dependent on fossil fuel industries are supported through the transition. Green jobs in renewable energy, energy efficiency, sustainable agriculture, and environmental restoration can provide new employment opportunities while contributing to climate solutions, but realizing this potential requires investments in education, training, and infrastructure. Financial mechanisms and carbon pricing policies are essential tools for mobilizing the investments needed for climate action while creating economic incentives for emission reductions. Carbon taxes, cap-and-trade systems, and other pricing mechanisms can make polluting activities more expensive while generating revenue that can be used to support clean energy deployment, adaptation measures, and assistance for affected communities. International climate finance mechanisms help developing countries access the resources needed for mitigation and adaptation efforts while recognizing the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities in addressing climate change. Looking toward the future, addressing climate change will require unprecedented levels of cooperation, innovation, and commitment across all sectors of society, from governments and businesses to civil society organizations and individuals. The window of opportunity for limiting global warming to relatively safe levels is rapidly closing, making urgent action essential to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change while building a more sustainable and equitable future for all humanity. The choices made in the coming decade will largely determine the trajectory of Earth's climate system and the world that future generations will inherit, making climate action not just an environmental imperative but a moral obligation to protect the planet and its inhabitants for generations to come.